Rachel hadn't been back to Elk Hollow in 15 years, but when she turned onto Maple Drive, she expected to see her mother's white clapboard house still standing. It was gone. At first, she thought she'd taken a wrong turn. The tall maple tree that used to drop crimson leaves like confetti every fall was still there, bare now, reaching knobby limbs toward a dull gray sky. But the narrow gravel driveway had been replaced by clean cement, still pale and new. Where the porch used to creak under Mabel Whitaker's rocking chair, there was nothing but the skeletal frame of a modern duplex, all sharp edges and synthetic siding. Rachel pulled her car off to the side and sat there for a long minute, engine running, breath misting up the windshield. As a child, she used to run down that same driveway in bare feet, chasing her sister Susan and screaming with laughter. Now, there was a for sale sign leaning crookedly on a metal post, its top half torn by the wind. 2 cement mixers sat silent beside the construction. She stepped out of the car, her old boots crunching against the last of the brittle leaves scattered over the sidewalk. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet earth. A crow called in the distance, sharp and lonely. This couldn't be right. The town had changed, sure, storefronts spruced up, a new traffic light blinking where the old hardware store used to be, but this? This was her mother's house. Or at least, it was supposed to be. Rachel ran her hand through her hair, pulled her coat tighter, and headed toward the clerk's office. The familiar creak of the town hall's front steps greeted her like an old acquaintance. Inside, everything still smelled faintly of lemon polish and photocopier toner. The clerk behind the counter, a man with a soft face and thick glasses, looked up with polite curiosity. "Hi," Rachel said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm looking for information on a property. 117, Maple Drive. It belonged to Mabel Whitaker." The man typed into the keyboard with slow deliberation. "Yes. Sold about 3 weeks ago. Buyer is a development group out of Montpelier. Permit issued for duplex construction." He tilted the screen slightly, as if inviting her to confirm it for herself. Rachel leaned in. Her eyes caught on the digital scan of a signature. Susan Whitaker. Listed as sole beneficiary. "That can't be right," Rachel said, too quietly for him to hear. "There should be 2 names." "Sorry," the clerk asked. She straightened. Was there a will? Or any document that mentioned another heir? The man blinked. "What I have on file shows Susan Whitaker filed as the executor. There was a property transfer, not a contested inheritance. You might want to speak with the attorney listed here." He slid a business card across the desk. Rachel took it without looking. She walked out of the building in a fog, her boots dull against the polished wood floor. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows over the sidewalk. She dug her phone out of her coat pocket with stiff fingers and scrolled to Susan's name. Voicemail. "You sold Mom's house, without even telling me?" Her voice cracked midway, and she hung up before she could say anything else. The bench in front of the town hall was colder than she remembered. She sat down anyway, not caring if the damp seeped through her coat. She held her purse in her lap like it might anchor her to the moment, keep her from floating off. She didn't cry. Not yet. The wind rustled through the last stubborn oak leaves still clinging to their branches. Somewhere, a bell rang, probably the church calling in the choir for Thanksgiving rehearsal. A dog trotted past on the sidewalk, tan and shaggy, with no collar and no urgency. It stopped for a moment near her feet, gave her a solemn look, and moved on. Rachel reached into her purse with trembling hands. The envelope was still there, creased and slightly worn from her long drive. Her mother's handwriting curled across the front, "For when you come home." She sits on a bench outside town hall, clutching a faded envelope Mabel had mailed her last year, labeled, "For when you come home." Inside the bakery, voices hushed when Rachel stepped in, as if the past had walked through the door, uninvited. The warmth hit her first, the mingling scents of cinnamon, brown sugar, and yeast. Then came the silence. A few heads turned, a few eyes widened. Rachel kept her gaze low, unwinding her scarf with deliberate calm. She could almost feel the weight of every memory pressing in from the polished floorboards and fogged window panes. She remembered standing behind that same counter as a teen, her hands covered in flour, the radio humming old country tunes while Mabel shaped pie crusts with the precision of a sculptor. Thanksgiving had always meant long shifts here, helping out Louise's mother before the rush of orders. Rachel had worn those white aprons proudly then, feeling like part of something. Now, she just felt like an intrusion. Louise Parker emerged from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair was shorter than Rachel remembered, but her face still carried the same kindness, tempered now by caution. "Rachel Whittaker," Louise said with a soft smile, though her eyes darted quickly toward the booths behind her. "Well, I'll be. I didn't hear you were in town." "I only got in yesterday," Rachel said, voice quiet. "Just passing through." Louise nodded slowly, then poured a cup of coffee without asking. She added a splash of cream, just like old times. "On the house," she said, sliding it across the counter. "Not everyone forgot the good you did, Ratch." Rachel gave a grateful nod and pulled a few crumpled bills from her coat pocket anyway. Louise didn't take them. A bell above the door jingled. Rachel moved aside, cradling the warm cup in her hands. At the corner table, Mrs. Bonner leaned toward her friend with theatrical subtlety. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet room, every word landed like a pebble in still water. "If I left my mother for 15 years, she said, stirring her tea slowly, "I wouldn't expect a slice of pie either." Rachel didn't flinch. She simply took a sip, letting the heat settle behind her ribs. The word stung, but not in the way gossip used to. It wasn't new. It was just familiar. Small towns didn't forget, and they rarely forgave. She caught a glimpse of Tommy Lee near the back, hunched over a half-eaten sandwich. He looked older, his boyish grin worn down by time, but his eyes still held that quiet steadiness. Their gazes met briefly. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Rachel turned and stepped back into the cold. Snow clouds were gathering overhead now, pushing the golden afternoon light into softer shades of gray. Main Street was nearly empty, save for a few bundled-up locals hurrying between the general store and the church office. The bell tower above the steeple loomed, casting long shadows over the walk. She walked without thinking, letting her boots guide her past familiar storefronts until the buildings thinned and trees took over. The cemetery gates hadn't changed. They still squeaked the same way when opened. The same iron leaves curled at the tips of each bar. She found the headstone easily. Mabel Whittaker. 1939 to 2022. There's always room at the table. Rachel crouched and placed the small wreath she'd picked up on the way into town, pine cones, dried cranberries, and a velvet ribbon. The sort of thing her mother would have liked. "I did come home," she whispered, brushing snowflakes from the name etched in granite. "Just a little late." The wind carried the faint chime of the church bells. She stood, pulling her coat tighter against the chill. As she turned to leave, footsteps crunched behind her. An older man in a brown coat approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "You're Rachel Whittaker, aren't you? I've been waiting to talk to you." The man handed Rachel a worn briefcase. "Your mother asked me to give this to you, personally. But I never got the chance." Rachel stood frozen on the sidewalk, the briefcase's cracked leather handle pressing into her palm. The man before her had grayed at the temples, his brown coat buttoned unevenly, as if he'd rushed to catch her. "Harold Jenkins," he said gently. "I used to practice law here. Your mother was a good friend." Rachel remembered the name. Harold had drawn up her learner's permit paperwork when she was 16, back when Elk Hollow handled everything from auto tags to wills in one place. Back when things felt simpler. She followed him in silence as he led her down a side street to a small brick building half covered in ivy. The brass plaque beside the door read, "Jenkins and Shore, Attorneys at Law, Retired." Inside, the air smelled of old books and lemon polish. The office was narrow but warm, lined with shelves that leaned under the weight of thick legal volumes. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. Dust motes floated in the shafts of afternoon light coming through half-closed blinds. Rachel hesitated on the threshold until Harold gestured to a worn leather chair. I should have given this to you last year, he said, setting the briefcase down on the desk and flipping the clasps open with slow fingers. But by the time Mabel passed, I just had a minor stroke. Things slipped. Rachel's eyes flicked to the envelope still peeking from her coat pocket. She sent me a letter too, she murmured. I never opened it. Harold nodded, as if understanding something unspoken. He pulled out a stack of papers tied with a green ribbon and a folded sheet of stationery yellowed with time. Start with this, he said, handing her the letter. She wrote it herself. No lawyers, just Mabel. Rachel unfolded the page. Her mother's handwriting was unmistakable, tidy cursive, a little shakier than she remembered. Rachel. You were always the strong one. I know I didn't say it enough. I never doubted you'd come back when it mattered. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I wanted you to know, everything I built, I meant to leave to both of you. I may not have had the chance to make it official, but my heart always knew you were part of this home. Tell Harold to show you the rest. Love always, Mom. Rachel swallowed hard. The words blurred as she blinked back the sting in her eyes. She sat down, hands trembling, and placed the letter in her lap like it might break if she held it any tighter. Harold laid 2 more documents on the desk. One was a typed will, and signed. The second, a letter addressed to him, dated 3 months before Mabel's death. She was going to revise the official will, he said softly. Name both you and Susan. But she fell ill before she could come in to sign. Still, she left these instructions with me, clearly stating her intent. Rachel traced the corner of the will with her finger. Susan acted like she was the only heir. Sold the house. Built over it. Harold sighed. I should have fought harder when Susan pushed the paperwork through. But without a signed will, there wasn't enough to challenge it. Rachel said nothing. Her throat was tight, her chest heavier than anger, it was grief now, full and quiet. The creak of Harold's old office chair filled the silence. I remember when you stayed up all night helping your mom bake for the church drive. She told me once you were the only reason that year's fundraiser hit its goal. Rachel looked away. She didn't want kindness now. It made things harder. After a moment, Harold reached again into the briefcase and withdrew another sheet of paper. There's something else. He laid it beside the unsigned will. This was the letter she asked me to deliver in person, when you came home. Rachel didn't speak. She didn't move. Is there any way to undo the sale? She asked finally. Harold's eyes met hers. Only if Susan agrees, or if someone in town speaks up. Rachel stood on the porch of the old bakery, hammering up a storm window, while inside, someone whispered her name with more sympathy than scorn. The wind tugged at her scarf as she adjusted the pane, her gloved fingers slipping slightly on the cold metal latch. The frame creaked into place, the same one she'd helped repair back in high school before a Thanksgiving rush, when a sudden freeze cracked the glass. No one had noticed then. No one had thanked her. She hadn't done it for that, anyway. Inside, the warm yellow lights glowed against the gray drizzle, silhouettes moving behind frosted panes. The bakery had changed a little, new tile on the floor, a more modern register, but the smell of cinnamon and yeast was timeless. Rachel caught a snippet of her name, softened now, not sharp like it had been. She stepped down, shouldered the old toolkit she'd borrowed from the back, and nodded once through the window to Louise, who stood watching. Louise gave a small wave. Just a flick of fingers, but the kind that came with recognition. The drizzle turned heavier by the time Rachel made it to the edge of Main Street. Thanksgiving was 2 days away. Elk Hollow's shop windows were decked out in paper turkeys and garlands of orange ribbon. Someone had hung a string of warm lights around the church fence, though only half of them worked. At the corner near the diner, a commotion caught her eye. Mrs. Hawthorne, the widow who lived above the old tailor's shop, stood at her front stoop bundled in 2 shawls and a parka, fiddling with a thermostat mounted to the porch wall. Rachel didn't hesitate. She crossed the street, boots splashing through shallow puddles. Cold night for a broken heater, Rachel said gently. Mrs. Hawthorne turned, squinting. Landlord says he'll come tomorrow. Been saying that 3 nights now. Rachel knelt by the outdoor unit, wiping condensation from the surface. A few minutes of checking, resetting, coaxing old wires with a practiced hand. Her father had taught her this kind of thing, how to make machines work when they didn't want to. There, she said. It'll hold till morning. The old woman blinked. You sure? Rachel nodded, already backing down the steps. If it quits again, I'm staying at the cabin past the orchard. You can holler. Mrs. Hawthorne looked like she might say more, but the door shut softly behind her. Later, under the low eaves of the church hall, Rachel slipped a pie tin onto the food drive table. She didn't put her name on it. The card read simply, pumpkin, extra cinnamon. She turned and left before anyone could see. Snow began to fall after dusk. Large, slow flakes that melted on contact. She spotted a familiar brown blur streaking down the sidewalk, Mrs. Lathrop's golden retriever, loose again. Rachel clicked her tongue, knelt low, and waited. When the dog barreled into her arms, she caught him with ease and walked him back through the snow, rubbing his ears like she used to when she dog-sat as a teen. No one asked her why she did these things. No one offered thanks. She preferred it that way. At the diner the next morning, she stopped in for a coffee and heard them, two women, seated near the coat rack, speaking in tones meant to be heard but not acknowledged. She's not what we thought, one said. Maybe she never was. Rachel didn't react. Just paid, tipped generously, and slipped back into the misty morning. By dusk, she'd returned to the cabin, damp coats steaming by the fire. She was stacking firewood when headlights swept across the porch. A pickup truck door slammed. Tommy Lee climbed the steps slowly, something tucked under his arm. I think you should see this, it's about the house. In the attic of the town records building, under dust and mouse droppings, lay a folder marked, pending transfer, Whitaker Estate. Rachel knelt beside the warped file cabinet, squinting in the dim yellow light that flickered overhead. Her gloves were already dirty, the tips coated in the grainy residue of years untouched. Tommy Lee crouched beside her, silent but steady, holding the flashlight like it was sacred. Snow whispered against the attic window, soft and relentless, the first real snow of the season. Mr. Bevis, the town clerk, had hesitated when she asked about the sale records. He'd scratched the edge of his chin, looked over the rim of his glasses, and said, "Give me 10 minutes." He'd emerged with a ring of keys and a look Rachel couldn't quite read, somewhere between guilt and resolve. He stood now at the attic door, arms crossed. You remember my grandson, Ethan? Rachel nodded. He got into Vermont Tech Robotics. Bevis's eyes softened. He only made it through high school because someone paid for his summer tutoring. Rachel didn't reply. That someone didn't want credit. He tilted his head. You're the reason he's in college. So? I figured it's time I helped back. Tommy found the folder buried behind a stack of boxes labeled Zoning Appeals, 1980s. He handed it to Rachel like it might crumble. She opened it slowly. There, inside, was the paper trail. Mabel's estate had not completed probate when the house was sold. Susan had filed early, pushed through a transfer that was legally premature. Rachel sat back on her heels, heartbeat loud in her ears. She knew, Tommy said quietly. She had to. Rachel turned to Mr. Bevis. Did you tell her? He looked away. She insisted. Said everything was handled. I was supposed to wait for confirmation, but she had the paperwork. And I didn't want trouble. Rachel exhaled, standing slowly. You're not the only one. Outside, the snow thickened. They drove in silence down Main Street, storefronts glowing behind frost-slicked windows. Louise met them at the bakery's back door with 2 steaming mugs and a question in her eyes. Rachel shook her head, no words yet. Back at the cabin, she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled the faded envelope from her coat pocket. She hadn't opened it since Harold's office. Her fingers trembled now as she unfolded the page. You're the heart of this place, Rachel. I wish I'd told you more. If I'm gone, I hope you'll stand up for what's right. Not for revenge. For peace. She read it twice, then a third time, before setting it gently on the nightstand. The fireplace crackled softly. Tommy had already gone, promising to keep an ear out if anything stirred in town. The snowfall outside glazed the window panes, blurring the edges of the dark. Rachel picked up the phone and dialed. Susan's voicemail clicked on after the third ring. Rachel didn't pause. "I'll be at the church tomorrow. I hope you come." The church pews creaked as Rachel stood up with the letter in her hand and a lump in her throat. Candlelight flickered against stained glass as the hymn came to a close, voices quieting into reverent stillness. Elk Hollow Church had never looked more tender. The wooden beams above glowed gold beneath the sconces, and the scent of pine boughs and warm cider floated from the basement kitchen. Snow ticked against the tall windows in soft rhythm. Rachel stepped toward the pulpit, boots echoing softly on the old wooden floor. Her hands trembled slightly, the folded letter brushing against her coat sleeve. She hadn't intended to speak, but now, with the church so full, and the memory of her mother close in every hymn and candle, it felt inevitable. "This place," she began, her voice steady despite the weight in her chest, "meant a great deal to my mother." A few faces nodded. Louise sat in the third row beside Mr. Jenkins, her eyes shining but proud. Tommy leaned near the back, arms crossed, silent as always. Rachel's gaze swept across the rows. "And to me, once. My mom, she believed in showing up. Even when she didn't know how to say the right thing." She unfolded the letter slowly. Her breath caught, just once. "She left me this," she said softly. "And I want to share a part of it." She read. "Give your sister the house, but make sure she understands what it costs to lose a sister." The room stilled. Rachel lowered the page. "I'm not here to claim anything. Not tonight. I just want to say that for all the years I was gone, I never stopped loving this town. Or her." The doors at the back creaked open. Heads turned. Susan stood in the entryway, snow dusting her coat shoulders, eyes uncertain. She walked slowly down the center aisle, every step drawing quiet murmurs, breath held. Rachel stepped down from the pulpit. They stood near the front pew, the same one Rachel had sat in after their father's funeral, alone, years ago. Susan didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was smaller than Rachel remembered. "It was never about the house, was it?" Rachel shook her head. "No. But you sold both." Susan blinked, and something shifted in her face, regret, maybe. Or recognition. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded document. She held it out, fingers pale. "It's yours," she said quietly. "It always was." A slow exhale moved through the crowd, like the release of breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Later, in the church basement, cider steamed in mismatched mugs and plates of pie vanished faster than they were sliced. Rachel stood near the window with Louise, watching Tommy tack a thank you note beside the food drive bin. Harold Jenkins approached with a manila envelope in hand. "They want to name the square after your mother," he said, tapping the folder. "Town council's already drawing up the motion." Rachel looked around, snow falling softly outside the window. Home wasn't just a house. It was how people remembered you when you were gone. Snow still clung to the windows of the little cottage, but inside, warmth had returned, not just from the fire, but from the quiet understanding that had finally settled between two sisters and the town they called home. Rachel hadn't come back to reclaim a house, she came to remember what love looked like in silence, in sacrifice, in second chances. Sometimes, the greatest kindness is the one no one sees, until it's too late to say thank you. And yet, goodness has a way of circling back, of revealing itself through hands extended and hearts reopened. If this story lingered with you, maybe it's because you've known someone like Rachel, or maybe you've been her without realizing it. Like a porch light left on in a storm, one act of grace can guide someone home.